For the past 4 years, there's been various content popping up around styles that we offer, but today we're going to talk to you on 12 boots that you don't know about. For those new to our channel and new to the brand, Jim Green has been around for over 30 years. So in each one of these styles, there is a little story behind why it is in our range, and many of these in front of me have actually been in our range since the early years. So boot number 1 happens to be the biggest selling boot in Jim Green history, and that is what we call our Highlander. The reason for this is we sell this boot direct to other businesses and large corporations. Now they come to us wanting an entry-level work boot, so we offer this in a variety of leathers and in a steel toe cap option. Now you may be asking, why don't we offer this boot on the international market? And that is because, being new to the global scene, we wanted to start with something a little bit more premium. So the bigger and older brother of the Highlander happens to be our Razorback boot. And these are the few differences I'm going to run through now. The Razorback is double lasted, so fully leather lined. The Highlander then has a synthetic lining on the calf. Now, if we were to ever offer this boot on the global scene, this will be the #1 change that we make. Another difference here is that you'll see there are 2 joins in this boot, allowing us to utilize more of the leather when manufacturing. Now this doesn't mean this is a less than boot, as many people do require a single lasted work boot. So for those working in a warmer climate, it will breathe a lot easier, and it's also going to be lighter. So another legend of our range, and hopefully we'll have it more easily available to the global market soon. Next up, while the Razorback is fresh in our minds, is a boot we call the Bushcat. Now this boot is identical spec to the Razorback, so a double lasted option, fully leather lined. The major and only difference in this boot is the upper pattern. So this is a more lower cut version of the Razorback boot. And the reason we have this is for you chaps who are on your haunches most of the day bending over. And being a lower cut boot, this just allows for a little bit more added comfort. Now this boot we actually offer in our ladies range as well, and hopefully later this year we'll have a few more ladies boots on offer. And still, while on the topic of Razorback and double lasted boots, is our Mean Machine. Now I've seen quite a few comments and people asking about this boot, and that is, it is identical spec to the Razorback and why we don't offer it on the global scene. The only difference between this boot and the Razorback is the upper pattern. Now you may be asking, why did we ever have the Razorback and the Mean Machine? And the reason is that this upper pattern existed before we came out with this boot. And that is another boot that no one really knows about. And that is what we call our live line boot, and one of the specialist options that we have in our range. So this boot is used by those working around electrical currents, and has quite a clever design, as we run copper wires through this boot, and what actually happens is that the user then clips the boot onto their uniform. So when they're walking around, and say they were to stand on a live wire, what actually happens is that the electricity, instead of coming into the boot and giving them a potentially life-threatening shock, the electricity runs through the boot and out the top, and the user doesn't even know that it happened. I'm not going to go into too many details about this boot, being quite specialist, but as you can imagine, there have been a number of people who are very thankful for having this on their feet. So while talking about specialist boots, let's move on to our smelting option. Now many of you that are familiar with the industry will know exactly what this boot is for. We manufacture it with the metal tassel here for added protection, and without. And the reason for manufacturing it without is that the boot is quite handy, especially when working in an environment where you can hook yourself onto something and create a dangerous situation. To finish the boot on my left hand side, and something you're all very familiar with, is our Turbo Felly. Now all we have done here is taken our standard Felly option and beefed it up a bit. So you can see the added piece of leather around the collar, and then we run this boot with what we call the Kalahari sole. Now this Turbo Felly is a favorite with the farmers, especially those walking many kilometers every day. the extra ruggedness of the sole and the slightly extra support of the collar. This boot is not everyone's cup of tea, but a great option in our range. Keeping with our fairly feel and low cut options is a shoe that we call the Bantam. Now this is a single lasted option with our JG leg sole and quite an interesting design to it, and this is definitely something that we're going to look at introducing to the international market eventually. From one extreme to the other, we have our Jim Green slipper, which is genuine sheepskin. Now, as you know, this is quite a competitive market and this style is fairly new to our range, so it's something we're just keeping on the sideline and maybe an idea for the future to offer internationally. Now onto a complete outlier of our range, the town and country boot. Now this boot makes use of our T&C last, and as you can see, very narrow compared to the other boots in our range. The construction of this boot is also not a stitched down boot. So what we do here is that the upper is lasted underneath the boot and we Blake stitch it to the midsole. We then take the boot to our number 10 machine and the outsole is then stitched onto the midsole, making this boot one of the strongest, if not the strongest boot in our range. Now, this is something I want to work on and potentially fine tune a little bit with the addition of our frog grip sole. I think it will make for a great option on this boot. So this is something we're going to play around with and potentially introduce to the range at a later stage. But right now, from South Africa, this is the boot that you can get your hands on. While talking on different constructions, let's have a look at our Monster Waterproof. Now this boot is 100% waterproof, and to get this spec, we make use of a waterproof sock inside the boot. Now this waterproof sock means we have to make use of a stuck-on sole, and many of you may be familiar with this boot as it was one of the first few options that we offered in the USA. It wasn't our best seller, and maybe because we were still in the early stages of establishing that side, but here in South Africa is actually one of our best sellers. So maybe at a later stage, you'll be seeing this monster reappearing on our website. Moving on from this is our Monster Stockman. Now this boot isn't waterproof, it just makes use of the same Monster sole. Now many of you are probably thinking I'd rather prefer the Stockman being resoleable, and funny enough, we actually can resole this boot. The only catch is you need a bucket sole or unit that fits this exact last that we use on this boot. So personally, I really enjoy the look of this boot. I think it's something a little bit different, especially for those that like a chunkier sole, and maybe an option for the future in our offerings. Now the last of the 12 boots is what we call our 4x4 boot. Some of you might be thinking I've seen this before, and that's because we ran a similar variation of this on our Razorback boot. We used our same Afrique leather and we used our tire sole, and we put together a Razorback version of this. Now this is a single lasted toe cap boot that we make for the northeast of South Africa. The rest of the country sales aren't all that great, but for some reason up northeast we do really well with this boot. So for anyone looking for a single laster boot with a serious amount of tread and a toe cap, this will be the boot to go for. Although we did at one stage, and maybe in the future might do it again, offer limited runs of our Razorback in this kind of combination. So that is all 12 boots with a little bit of a brief history and run through. And in the comment section below, let us know which of these you would love to get your hands on. And hopefully in the near future, we'll have these more easily available to all. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.